For the sixth colour palette of July 2022, I chose to focus on US national parks. In case you don't know, July is a limited colour palette art challenge that I've been running during the month of July since 2018. The aim of the challenge is to create imagery using no more than 5 colours, though black and white can also be used. It's also possible to blend the colours and use things like blending modes and transparencies. When I looked at this colour palette, I knew it would be best suited for landscapes. That's especially due to the green and the blue which we're used to seeing in nature, but I have to admit that the red might have thrown me a bit. I started out doing some research into different US national parks and ended up finding some that I thought would work well with this project. The first image in this series is of Yosemite National Park, and I've focused on the view of Yosemite Valley as seen from tunnel view. One of the challenges I had with this image was all the trees, especially as I only had one green colour to work with. In order to create more depth, I used blending modes and transparencies. My go-to was Multiply, though the colour I used to create the darker greens wasn't the green, but it was actually the blue. And to create the lighter colours and the golden light on the mountaintops, I used the blending mode Overlay with the cream colour. As for the destination posters I made for Japan, I ended up making amends to these posters after July finished. Don't worry though, all the process is shown here with the exception of the typography which was done in Photoshop. The main reason for making the amends was to make sure that the text placement and typography in general was consistent throughout the destination posters I created. Some of what I changed was to make sure that there was enough room for the text. However, I also worked on fixing some contrast issues as some of the colours blended a bit more than I would like. If you have any questions about my process, please let me know in the comment section. The second image is for Yellowstone National Park, where I focused on the lower Yellowstone Falls. As these national parks are so big, it was only natural for me to attempt to pick specific areas to paint. This of course meant that I was looking for reference images, as I sadly haven't been to any of these parks. Looking back, I remember how much I struggled with this image, and in hindsight, I realised that part of the issue is that I didn't simplify enough. So instead, I kept adding more and more details and textures, only for things to get more and more muddled, and I just couldn't for the life of me figure out how to fix it. This happens, and it's something that I find much easier to notice looking back at images, but isn't something that I'm good at noticing while painting. So of course, it's something I'm working on improving, and looking back at the process videos for these images is definitely helping me with this. I'd like to note that I ended up making a lot of changes to this image after July concluded. This wasn't just to make sure that the text placement was correct, but I did a lot of tweaks to the image itself as well. This included working with this awesome brush that created more believable tree silhouettes, as mine seemed a bit too sketchy at times. So know that there are some really helpful and useful brushes out there that can help you with these kind of things and really help speed things up. Finally, we have the poster for Zion National Park, where I focused on Zion Canyon. This canyon is about 24 kilometers long and up to 800 meters deep. A few learnings from this colour palette. There is no denying that these colours were a bit challenging to me, and like I mentioned earlier, I found it a bit tricky to work with just one green, especially when there was so much greenery in the images. Though I also found a good solution to that using blending modes. This was also the solution I used to keep colours from blending a bit too much. While I feel this colour palette was perfect for landscapes, the red sometimes posed an issue as I wanted to include it, but I wasn't entirely certain how to. The one thing I could have done more of was to simply omit a colour such as the red, because while this is a limited colour palette challenge, it doesn't mean that there's a need to use absolutely all the colours all the time. In hindsight, I think it would also have been better to have used more white in the images. For instance, if I used white with the sky instead of the cream, the sky wouldn't look as muddy, which is what happens when you mix a cool toned colour with a warm toned colour. There were also some contrast issues with the palette, which again the blending modes and transparencies helped with. But hindsight being 2020, I would have preferred to have sorted out some of these issues while I created the colour palettes, rather than having to deal with them while painting. Thank you so much for watching. More process videos are up on my YouTube channel, and check out my social media accounts and my website for more of my work.